Hi guys, today we are going to find out, what if Lincoln had survived and served 2 terms? You're sitting in Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865, watching Our American Cousin unfold on stage. The audience laughs at Harry Hawk's comedic line about knowing enough law to turn you inside out. Behind you, in the presidential box, Abraham Lincoln chuckles softly at the performance. John Wilkes Booth creeps through the outer door of the state box, his single-shot Derringer ready. But tonight something goes wrong. Or perhaps, something goes right for history. Booth's pistol clicks uselessly as the percussion cap fails to ignite the gunpowder. You probably won't survive the ripple effects this mechanical failure creates across the next century. Lincoln's bodyguard John Parker, miraculously at his post tonight, tackles the fumbling assassin immediately. The president rises, shaken but alive, as Booth screams his theatrical Latin phrase into the chaos. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where this alternate history reaches. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. Within hours, news spreads that the president has survived an assassination attempt. The nation collectively exhales, not knowing they've just avoided decades of bitter Reconstruction politics. You wake up on April 15th to a world where Abraham Lincoln draws breath. The morning newspapers scream headlines about the failed assassination, not presidential death. Lincoln himself appears surprisingly calm, already drafting his moderate Reconstruction policies. Without martyrdom to sanctify his memory, you watch him implement malice toward none, practically. Southern states brace for occupation, but Lincoln's approach feels different, more healing than punishment. You observe Confederate generals like Robert E. Lee receiving presidential pardons within weeks. Former plantation owners find themselves negotiating directly with Lincoln's administration for land restoration. The Freedmen's Bureau operates under Lincoln's personal oversight, focusing on education over redistribution. You witness newly freed slaves receiving government-sponsored job training rather than empty promises. Lincoln establishes mobile courts throughout the South to handle Reconstruction disputes fairly. His 10% plan gains momentum as Southern states quickly meet loyalty requirements. You watch Lincoln personally interview former Confederate officials for potential reintegration roles. The president's survival means no Andrew Johnson presidency to bungle Reconstruction. Tennessee and Louisiana officially rejoin the Union by summer 1865 under Lincoln's guidance. You realize this measured approach prevents the bitter lost cause mythology from taking root. You enter the halls of Congress in late 1865, where Lincoln faces his toughest political battle yet. Radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner want blood, not reconciliation. They demand harsh military occupation and permanent disenfranchisement of all Confederate supporters. Lincoln sits in tense meetings, his famous patience tested by his own party's extremism. You watch Stevens pound his cane, declaring Lincoln too soft on traitors and slaveholders. The president counters with his prairie lawyer logic, arguing vengeance breeds future rebellion. Senator Benjamin Wade threatens to block Lincoln's Reconstruction appointments unless he hardens his stance. You witness heated cabinet meetings where Secretary Stanton sides with the radicals against Lincoln. Lincoln's moderate allies like Lyman Trumbull find themselves caught between presidential pragmatism and party pressure. The president begins using his considerable political capital to outmaneuver the extremist wing. You observe Lincoln privately meeting with individual congressmen, using his legendary storytelling to sway votes. He frames Reconstruction as healing a family after a devastating quarrel, not punishing wayward children. The radicals attempt to override Lincoln's vetoes of punitive legislation throughout 1866. Lincoln's survival paradoxically makes him more politically vulnerable than martyrdom would have. You realize living presidents face opposition that dead saints never encounter in American politics. You witness Lincoln's second term beginning in March 1865, with the economy as his secret weapon. The wartime industrial machine doesn't shut down. Instead, Lincoln redirects it toward massive infrastructure projects. You watch government contracts flow to railroad companies, spurring westward expansion at unprecedented speed. The Transcontinental Railroad, originally scheduled for completion in 1869, finishes by late 1867. Lincoln's administration pours federal money into telegraph lines, connecting every major American city. You observe former Union soldiers finding immediate employment in construction and mining ventures. The president personally breaks ground on the Northern Pacific Railway in Minnesota. Southern cotton production rebounds quickly under Lincoln's economic incentives rather than military coercion. You witness the birth of America's first truly national stock market as investment flows westward. Lincoln establishes the national banking system reforms that will survive into the 20th century. Manufacturing cities like Chicago and Cleveland double in size during Lincoln's economic boom. You see immigrant labor flooding into America, drawn by unprecedented job opportunities. The Homestead Act expansions under Lincoln grant 160 acres to any citizen willing to farm. Gold strikes in Montana and Colorado receive federal protection and infrastructure support. You realize Lincoln's survival creates an economic revolution that transforms America decades early. You enter 1866 watching Lincoln push beyond the 13th Amendment toward comprehensive civil rights legislation. The president personally drafts what becomes the 14th Amendment with stronger enforcement mechanisms. Lincoln's version includes federal oversight of state elections and mandatory education funding. You witness him meeting with Frederick Douglass weekly, crafting policies based on lived experience. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 passes with Lincoln's direct lobbying and political horse trading. You observe Lincoln establishing federal schools throughout the South staffed by Northern teachers. His administration creates the first federal job training programs specifically for former slaves. Lincoln personally visits newly integrated schools in Virginia, creating national headlines. You watch him negotiate with Southern governors, offering federal funds for compliance with integration. The president establishes a civil rights enforcement bureau with actual teeth and funding. Lincoln's survival means he can personally defend these policies against conservative Supreme Court challenges. You see him appointing progressive judges who will uphold civil rights for decades. The 15th Amendment passes earlier, in 1867, with Lincoln's active campaigning behind it. Lincoln creates federal voter registration drives in the South, protected by federal marshals. You realize his living presidency prevents the rollback of civil rights that historically occurred. You observe Lincoln's foreign policy genius emerge as European powers scramble to understand surviving America. The British government, which nearly recognized the Confederacy, now courts Lincoln desperately for trade agreements. You watch Lincoln leverage American economic strength to renegotiate the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty with Britain. France withdraws from Mexico earlier under pressure from Lincoln's strengthened diplomatic position. The president skillfully uses America's post-war industrial capacity as diplomatic currency with European nations. You witness Lincoln establishing formal diplomatic relations with newly unified German states. Russia, grateful for American Civil War support, grants favorable Alaska Purchase terms in 1867. Lincoln's administration negotiates the first comprehensive trade agreement with Japan since Perry's opening. You observe the president hosting European delegations amazed by America's rapid post-war recovery. Lincoln uses his international credibility to mediate between Prussia and Austria over territorial disputes. The Trent Affair resolution enhances Lincoln's reputation as a diplomatic problem solver globally. You watch him establish America's first permanent diplomatic missions in Latin American republics. Lincoln's survival prevents the isolationist foreign policy that historically followed his assassination. European investment flows into American railroads and industry under Lincoln's stable leadership. You realize Lincoln transforms America from regional power to emerging global influence decades early. You accompany Lincoln on his unprecedented presidential tour through the former Confederacy in spring 1867. The train journey begins in Virginia, where curious crowds gather at every station stop. You witness Lincoln's first speech in Richmond, delivered from the steps of the Confederate Capitol. His words focus on shared American identity rather than Northern victory or Southern defeat. You observe former Confederate soldiers removing their hats respectfully as Lincoln's train passes. In North Carolina, Lincoln visits tobacco farms and discusses economic recovery with local farmers. The president's visit to Charleston includes a symbolic walk through the ruins of Fort Sumter. You watch Lincoln place flowers at Confederate graves, scandalizing Northern newspapers but touching Southern hearts. His meeting with plantation owners focuses on transitioning to paid labor systems gradually. You witness emotional scenes as Lincoln personally greets former slaves who remember his Emancipation Proclamation. The president's Georgia speech emphasizes rebuilding rather than retribution, drawing unexpected applause. Lincoln's visit to New Orleans includes a public dinner with integrated seating, creating national headlines. You observe how his physical presence humanizes the presidency for Southerners who viewed him as a tyrant. The tour concludes in Tennessee with Lincoln praising Andrew Johnson's early Reconstruction efforts. You realize this personal reconciliation tour prevents decades of regional resentment and lost cause mythology. You witness Lincoln's second term unleashing an unprecedented technological revolution across America. The president establishes the National Science Foundation in 1866, decades before its historical creation. You observe government grants flowing to inventors like Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell. Lincoln's administration funds the first transcontinental telegraph cable, connecting America to Europe instantly. The president personally tests Bell's telephone prototype in the White House, amazed by its potential. You watch federal money supporting early experiments in electric lighting for government buildings. Lincoln creates tax incentives for manufacturing companies adopting steam-powered machinery. The Smithsonian Institution receives massive funding increases for scientific research under Lincoln's leadership. You witness the first federally funded weather prediction service launching in 1867. Lincoln's survival means government support for the scientific method during rapid industrialization. The president establishes technical colleges in every state, creating America's first skilled workforce. You observe Lincoln meeting with railroad engineers to discuss standardizing track gauges nationwide. His administration funds research into steel production, accelerating the coming steel age. Lincoln personally visits Menlo Park to encourage Edison's experiments with government backing. You realize Lincoln's scientific curiosity accelerates American technological development by decades. You enter 1868 watching the most unprecedented constitutional crisis in American history unfold. Lincoln faces intense pressure from supporters, urging him to seek an unprecedented third presidential term. The 22nd Amendment doesn't exist yet, making a third term technically legal but historically taboo. You witness Lincoln wrestling with his own ambition against Washington's two-term precedent. Republican Party leaders argue that Reconstruction requires Lincoln's continued leadership beyond 1869. The president spends sleepless nights in the White House, consulting constitutional scholars and advisors. You observe heated debates in newspapers about whether America needs a president or an elected king. Lincoln's closest advisors split between those encouraging him to run and those warning against it. Frederick Douglass privately urges Lincoln to step down, preserving democratic traditions for future generations. You watch Lincoln drafting and redrafting his decision speech multiple times throughout early 1868. The Democratic Party prepares for either scenario, knowing they face Lincoln's enormous popularity. Lincoln ultimately announces in May 1868 that he will honor Washington's precedent and retire. You witness the collective relief across America as the constitutional crisis resolves peacefully. His decision to step down paradoxically enhances Lincoln's historical reputation more than a third term would. You realize Lincoln's voluntary retirement strengthens American democracy for all future presidents. You witness Lincoln's final presidential months creating a legacy that reshapes America for generations. The outgoing president establishes presidential libraries, beginning with his own in Springfield, Illinois. You observe Lincoln personally selecting his successor, endorsing Ulysses S. Grant for the 1868 election. His farewell address becomes the most quoted presidential speech since Washington's retirement warning. You watch Lincoln establishing the Lincoln Foundation for Democratic Education in freed slave communities. The former president plans to practice law again, but on a national scale representing civil rights cases. You witness European universities offering Lincoln honorary doctorates and speaking engagements. Lincoln's survival means no Andrew Johnson presidency, preventing the historical rollback of Reconstruction. You observe Southern states maintaining their Reconstruction progress under Lincoln's moral authority. The former president becomes America's elder statesman, consulted by future presidents for decades. You watch Lincoln in 1870 mediating labor disputes during America's rapid industrialization. His 1872 speaking tour draws massive crowds as Americans hunger for his wisdom. You witness Lincoln's influence on the 1876 election, preventing the compromise that ended Reconstruction. The former president lives until 1885, seeing America become a true industrial and moral power. You realize Lincoln's survival created an America where democracy and equality advanced together permanently. You step back from this alternate timeline, watching how one misfired pistol changed everything. Lincoln's survival prevented the vengeful Reconstruction that historically poisoned American race relations for generations. His moderate approach created genuine reconciliation rather than festering resentment in the South. The economic boom under his second term accelerated American development by decades. You realize that living Lincoln became a moral compass guiding America through its growing pains. His voluntary retirement strengthened democratic traditions that might have weakened under crisis. The civil rights progress under his administration couldn't be easily reversed by successor presidents. You see an America that became a global power earlier, but with stronger democratic foundations. Lincoln's survival created a different national character, more unified, more progressive, more confident. Sometimes history's greatest changes come from the smallest mechanical failures. What if that percussion cap had worked properly on April 14, 1865? Would America have been stronger or weaker without its greatest martyr becoming its greatest elder statesman instead?